25 years ago, the Tigger movie was released in theaters, and I was a month shy of turning 4. God, I feel old. Starting off a trilogy of Winnie the Pooh movies about the friends who usually helped him on his adventures, with Pooh Bear himself returning the favor by helping his friends discover their purpose. For the first 2 movies anyways, we'll get to the other one later. One day in the 100-acre wood, Tigger does what he does best, bounce around everywhere he goes, usually at the expense of his friends. But when everyone loses their patience at him by pointing out they're not as bouncy as him because they're not Tiggers, he starts to realize that being the only one can be lonely sometimes. And after searching and failing to find a literal and figurative family tree, Roo and his friends decide to cheer him up by trying to write a letter towards him signed as his family, where, upon reading it, he somehow comes to the conclusion that his family is real and coming to visit him the next day because he read between the lines? That made absolutely no sense as a little kid, and now that I'm an adult and know what that means, it's surprisingly even dumber. Where did that come from? You might be surprised to learn that Tigger was actually my favorite of the Winnie the Pooh characters growing up, because I was a much more energetic, optimistic kid than I am now, or at least I tell myself I was. Because now that I'm an adult, I must say, Eeyore's outlook on life is way too optimistic. Needless to say, like most Winnie the Pooh movies, as you get older and watch them, you realize Eeyore's jokes are more morbid and surprisingly hilarious than you realize. And to be honest, with all the stuff that I loved as a kid that turns out to be preachy and corny the older I get, I was afraid to even watch this, let alone review it, but I'm happy to say that even though there were a few times that I hit mute or fast forward, for everything we loved about Winnie the Pooh to begin with, there's enough to still smile and bounce your feet to decades later. So originally the Tigger movie was meant to go straight to video, but the producers loved the songs so much that they actually bumped it to theatrical, and for good reason. They got the Sherman Brothers back to create songs that are just as catchy and hummable as the original. For the most part, someone like me does have decent lyrics, and the idea of Tigger singing a sad song is interesting, but the background vocals from the other animals who sometimes talk except for when they don't, it was just weird and really distracting. But every other song, despite almost all of them revolving around Tigger, there's maybe one filler song where Pooh sings a lullaby to bees, but even that was pretty decent. And having to say and sing the word Tigger over and over, the Shermans once again create so many clever lyrics, rhyme schemes, and the director's visuals itself make it feel fresh to listen to every single time. Especially with Round My Family Tree and How to Be a Tigger, without the visuals of Tigger's imagination of his family lineage, or Roo and everybody practicing how to be just like him, I don't think the songs would have had the exact same effect. And as much as I hated hearing characters say whoop-de-doop or alley-oop or bounce or however you say it, I'm not entirely sure, when they actually sang about it and put Roo through a pretty funny training montage, it was cool to see. Even Your Heart Will Lead You Home, a song the Shermans wrote with Kenny Loggins of all people, which, listening to it, you never would have picked up on that, was super touching to listen to. It's the rare case where you actually want to watch the end credits just for the song, and the fact that the credits themselves are drawn to look just like the A.A. Milne illustrations. Speaking of, the animation in this is so gorgeous that, for a movie originally meant to go straight to video, they spent every penny wisely, and it honestly would have been a shame had it not gone to theaters. The designs themselves have that sketchy look like previous entries where the line work on them is a lot more squiggly, but in a way that makes them feel more alive and bring out their personalities, especially considering there's a lot more scenes than previous movies where the characters look more sad or are crying their eyes out, and with dotted lines, it's harder to sell those emotions, but the color of their tears, the wrinkles their faces make whenever they cry, it's super convincing. But it's the color scheme of a bright orange autumn or navy blue winter that just pop off the screen and create such a beautiful atmosphere. It's honestly a shame this was Jun Falkenstein's only directing gig, because she knew what she was doing. It also sucks that while they tried getting the original voice actor Paul Winchell to come back and play Tigger in the Tigger movie, after one recording session his voice just sadly wasn't the same anymore. It would have been a great bittersweet swan song just on that note alone. But thankfully we were grateful enough to have Jim Cummings in his first movie as Tigger, who I'd say does a 90% spot-on impression of Winchell's voice, but he has the energy and charisma down to a T that just hearing the exuberance come out of his voice is just so infectious and passionate to watch. But at the same time, when he has to sound sadder, more depressed than usual as Tigger becomes more increasingly lonely over time, even though the dialogue can get repetitive and pretty hokey, Cummings still sells a normally upbeat character feeling blue flawlessly. Probably the biggest surprise in this movie is Roo, who's usually a background character in so many Pooh movies and shows to the point where you kind of forget that he's even one of Christopher Robinson's toys. But here, he's a considerably more interesting and likable character. They really focus on the brotherly bond between him and Tigger, where They're both equally naive and childish, but because Kanga is his mother, Roo can be somewhat more insightful, but he still needs to rely on Tigger in order to learn how to bounce or have someone to bounce with when everyone else is busy, the same way that Tigger needs him as a friend. The connection between the two of them was so simple yet endearing that at the very end where Tigger gives him a family heirloom, it did make me choke up, because it's Winnie the Pooh, how can you not? He even has conversations and heart-to-heart moments with Pooh and the other friends that I don't think I've seen in any iteration before. I mean, when was the last time Pooh and Roo were the only characters in the room and they just hugged each other? The one thing I definitely give this trilogy of movies credit for is that they expanded upon Roo as a prominent member of the group. Granted, Nikita Hopkins' voice can be a little too grating and high-pitched from time to time, but he still sells the charm and innocence that you would expect from a character like this. Hell, Owl's a more supportive character in this than he has been before or after, if we're being honest. And granted, sometimes when he does help Tigger, it is to stroke his own ego as the smartest, wisest one, but he's still genuinely eager to help him in any way he can, even when it doesn't serve him. That's actually a huge change of pace for a character like that. So for everything that's good about the Tigger movie, most of it is in the first 2/3, because the final act loses a lot of steam and features the least enjoyable aspects. For the first 30 to 40 minutes, this is still a small, intimate story featuring Pooh and friends that doesn't take itself too seriously, but when Tigger reads the letter, somehow comes to the conclusion that his family is coming to visit him, never mind the fact that there's nothing for him to read between the lines of, and he's forcefully put himself in a position where he's gonna be depressed regardless. There are scenes featuring Pooh and friends being caught in a lie revealed that pisses Tigger off so much that he decides to run away. There's a search party during the middle of a huge blizzard, and a climax. Yeah, say that part out loud. Winnie the Pooh has a climax. I know I'm taking that from Nostalgia Critic, but he's right to be upset about that. Where they have to outrun and bounce their way out of an avalanche. Scenes that, when you're a little kid, are kind of suspenseful because you've never seen dramatic beats like that in a Winnie the Pooh movie, but growing up years later, it's a huge waste of time because you already know they're gonna make it out okay, and it's just so stupid to watch that you remind yourself why stuff like this wasn't in Winnie the Pooh to begin with, because there's no reason for it to. As great as the message is in this, and it's communicated well, it takes a really long time to communicate it well. If anything, you didn't need an entire hour-long movie in order to convey this, because 20 minutes in, or at least 20 minutes, half an hour, I'm not entirely sure, Kanga literally spells out to Roo, "We are Tigger's family." But it takes until the very end for him to come to that conclusion, or anyone else to really confront him on that. And if this were any other kids series, I'd probably be a lot more frustrated about it, but because it's Winnie the Pooh, just seeing these characters talk to one another is entertaining and wholesome in and of its own right. It's easier to just hit mute or fast forward and not be bothered by it. That said, the one objective flaw I really have with this movie is that there are certain characters who should be more pivotal to the story, but they come in and out way too infrequently or are just ditched altogether. They got John Hurt of all people to be the narrator, and great choice. His voice is obviously sophisticated. He interacts with Tigger very well in the opening where Tigger goes, "You know, a lot of these stories are about that silly old bear." But literally halfway through the movie, he just up and disappears, and the movie pretends like he never existed. He doesn't get a bookend of, "And so Pooh and his friends," and so on and so forth. Also, I never thought in my life I would complain about something like this in Winnie the Pooh, but Rabbit's not in this a ton either, and on the one hand, because he's always the hardest on Tigger, and he spends a good chunk of this feeling down in the dumps, having him in the movie a lot more often where he'd be kicking him while he's down does sound bad, and on paper, it seems like a good idea to feature him less and less. And there are times during the search party where he does actually agree to go along with everybody, and even lend Piglet his code for warmth, does remind us that deep down he is an overall okay guy. But here's the thing, as much as Rabbit has gone on and on about what it is he doesn't like about Tigger, he never actually admits what he does like about him when everyone else does. He's the only one in the group that doesn't help everyone write the letter. In fact, he's completely unaware of this until halfway through the film. So when everyone gathers in a circle and recites the letter they wrote, and Rabbit for some reason acts like he was a part of it, or poses in the family portrait at the end, it just felt disingenuous and unearned. And lastly, I know this sounds like a nitpick, but it does bother me that Christopher Robin only shows up at the very end just to remind us that he's there. Don't get me wrong, when they reenact the original by showing his room in live action, how much he definitely injects his own personal beliefs into Pooh and everyone's adventures, like the fact that Every iteration I've seen of Christopher Robin only has a single mom for a family, just like Kanga and Roo, or how he's an only child as everyone else is. You can definitely get the sense that they're implying Christopher Robin himself once felt lonely about being the only one, and that should technically be enough, but at the same time, cheap cameos like this remind me how little he really interacts with the toys that aren't Pooh Bear. And this may sound like a nitpick, but there are so many weird random pop culture references in this for stuff like Jerry Springer, the Brady Bunch, 7-Year Itch that just make me sit there and go, you know Christopher Robin's a British little kid, right? I know his toys all have American accents, so maybe he immigrated, but Owl has a British voice, so are the toys American imports, but why would they have accents if they're in Christopher Robin's fantasy? This world is just weird. I know this is an American-made and aimed movie, but come on guys, do your research. So, even though 25 years later, the Tigger movie isn't as equally entertaining for kids and adults as much as the original, I dare say the 2011 one struck a little bit more of a balance, it still has everything you want to see in a Winnie the Pooh movie. The characters are still infectiously charming to watch, the songs are hummable and really catchy. I'm surprised how many of them went right back into my memory the second I heard them. And if nothing else, is just beautiful to look at. So if you are feeling curious, nostalgic, or you have little kids of your own and you want to show them something you grew up with around their age, definitely give it a watch. And with that guys, thanks as always for watching. Let me know in the comments below what you thought of the Tigger movie, and what's your favorite of the trilogy of movies that came out around that time? Whatever they are, let me know in the comments below. Be sure to like, subscribe, check me out on Patreon and buy me a coffee, and stay tuned for my next video on Pooh's Heffalump movie 20 years later. Prepare to have your hearts broken. TTFN.